a man's wrists. A successful, law-abiding homeowner stood on his own front porch, humiliated before his new neighbors, while two arrogant police officers exchanged satisfied smiles, convinced they had caught a fearless burglar in the act. They had not verified the address. They had not properly examined his identification. And, when the police chief heard the suspect's name over the radio, he did not simply drive to the scene. He raced there in a state of blind panic, cold sweat pouring down his back. Those officers had not merely arrested an innocent man. They had placed handcuffs on the one person with enough authority to dismantle their entire department. The evening began like any other crisp autumn twilight in Crestwood Hills, Illinois, an affluent neighborhood maintained with almost obsessive precision. Towering oak trees lined the streets. Imported luxury sedans rested in wide driveways. The residents paid a premium for silence, security, and predictability. Marcus Ellington appreciated the quiet. At 48, Marcus had spent much of his adult life building an extraordinary career in law and public service. He commanded respect in both courtrooms and government offices. Tall and broad-shouldered, with silver beginning to appear at his temples, Marcus carried himself with a naturally distinguished presence. He had recently moved into the spacious four-bedroom colonial at 4420 Oakwood Drive. Most of the moving boxes remained unopened inside. That evening, Marcus stepped onto the porch wearing a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks to retrieve a package that had been left near the edge of his property. The problem began when he turned around to go back inside. The sophisticated smart lock installed on the custom mahogany front door had malfunctioned. A blinking red light mocked him each time he entered the security code. The mechanism had jammed. Frustrated, Marcus sighed and placed the package on the porch. He removed a small flathead screwdriver from his pocket, a habit left over from his younger years restoring old automobiles. He crouched beside the door and carefully attempted to open the battery compartment so he could reset the system. It was a minor inconvenience that should have taken only a few moments. Marcus never noticed the curtains moving across the street. Miriam Gable, the self-appointed neighborhood watch captain, stood behind her window, watching him through an expensive pair of binoculars. Miriam had lived in Crestwood Hills for decades and took great pride in believing she knew exactly who belonged in the neighborhood. She had been away when Marcus moved in and had not seen the moving vehicles. All she saw was a tall black man dressed in dark clothing, crouched beside the front door of what she believed was the vacant Henderson property, using a tool near the lock. She did not hesitate. Miriam grabbed her cell phone and called emergency services. "Yes, police, I need to report a break-in taking place right now," she whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "The address is 4420 Oakwood Drive. There's a man trying to enter the house. He has some kind of tool at the front door. You need to hurry before he gets inside." A patrol vehicle was finishing a routine traffic stop nearby. Inside were Officer Trent Harlow and Officer Wesley Pike. Harlow was an experienced patrolman whose aggressive arrogance often concealed deep personal insecurity. Pike was still relatively new to the department and desperate to earn the older officer's approval. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. "Possible burglary in progress at 4420 Oakwood Drive. Suspect currently at the front entrance." Harlow immediately pressed the accelerator. "Finally, something interesting," he muttered as the siren began to wail and the cruiser raced through the quiet suburban streets. A burglary in Crestwood Hills? This guy must be an idiot. Back on the porch, Marcus had successfully opened the battery compartment. He removed the batteries, waited briefly, and reinserted them. The keypad illuminated with a satisfying green glow. Marcus smiled, rose to his feet, and brushed the dust from his knees. He reached for the handle. Without warning, the blinding glare of a police spotlight covered him, throwing a long, distorted shadow across the brick wall of his own house. Tires screamed against the pavement as the patrol car jumped the curb and stopped aggressively near the end of the driveway. "Step away from the door! Show me your hands! Now!" The officer's voice exploded through the vehicle's public address system. Marcus turned and raised one arm to shield his eyes from the intense light. Two figures stepped out of the cruiser. Both officers kept their hands positioned threateningly near their holstered weapons. Marcus felt his pulse accelerate, but decades of legal experience immediately took control of his reaction. He understood the statistics. He knew how quickly a misunderstanding could become deadly. Marcus inhaled slowly and made certain that every movement was deliberate and clearly visible. "Good evening, officers," he said. His voice was calm, deep, and steady. He raised both hands to chest level, palms open. "There is no emergency. I was repairing the lock on my front door." "I told you to step away from the door," Harlow shouted. He removed his taser and advanced along the walkway. Pike moved beside him, keeping one hand on his handgun while looking noticeably nervous. "Come down the steps. Do it now." "Officers, I am the homeowner," Marcus replied as he slowly stepped down from the porch. "My name is Marcus Ellington and I live at this address. My identification is in my rear pocket." Harlow released a cynical laugh. "Of course you're the homeowner. Get on the ground and place your fingers behind your head." Marcus stopped on the lowest step. He remained outwardly calm, but his eyes hardened. "Officer, I am complying with your instructions. However, I will not lie in the dirt outside my own home. I have identified myself and offered to provide identification. I strongly recommend that you de-escalate the situation and verify my residence." "You don't give the commands here," Harlow sneered. He closed the distance and seized Marcus's left arm with violent force, pulling him off balance. The physical contact was completely unnecessary. Marcus stumbled but quickly recovered, his solid frame making him difficult to throw to the ground. Although he had not resisted, his ability to remain standing awakened something hostile inside Harlow. "Stop resisting!" the officer yelled, using the familiar phrase officers often relied on when searching for justification to escalate force. "I am not resisting," Marcus said firmly, his heart pounding against his ribs. "You are assaulting me on my own property." Pike rushed forward and grabbed Marcus's other arm. Together, the officers forced the 48-year-old man face first against the hood of his own charcoal gray Mercedes-Benz S-Class. The impact forced the air from Marcus's lungs. The cold metal pressed painfully against his cheek. Neighbors began emerging from their houses. Porch lights came on one after another along Oakwood Drive. Miriam stood near the edge of her lawn with her arms crossed, watching with a satisfied smile as the officers handled the person she considered a threat. Other residents, people Marcus had not yet had an opportunity to meet, raised their phones and began recording the confrontation. "Spread your legs," Harlow ordered. He kicked Marcus's ankles farther apart and drove one knee into his lower back, forcing him painfully against the Mercedes. "Search his pockets, Pike. Find out what he stole." "I stole nothing," Marcus said. His voice was slightly muffled against the car, but it remained unnervingly controlled. "My wallet is in my rear pocket. My driver's license displays this exact address. The keys to this vehicle, the vehicle you are pressing me against, are in my other pocket." Pike hesitated before reaching into Marcus's pocket and removing a sleek leather wallet. He opened it and examined the driver's license beneath the dim streetlight. "Harlow, his identification says Marcus Ellington. The address matches this property." Harlow did not remove the pressure from Marcus's back. "It's fake. Or he stole the wallet from the real homeowner and planned to use it if he was caught." He looked down at Marcus with contempt. "You think I'm stupid? People like him don't live in houses like this." Marcus closed his eyes. The ignorance of the statement settled over the street. People like him. The meaning was unmistakable. Harlow violently pulled Marcus's arms behind his back. The heavy steel handcuffs closed around his wrists. The officer tightened them far beyond what was necessary, causing the metal to bite immediately into Marcus's skin. "You are under arrest for attempted burglary, trespassing, and resisting arrest," Harlow said. He leaned near Marcus's ear, his hot breath crossing the side of Marcus's face. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." The officers pulled Marcus upright. He stood in his own driveway with his hands restrained behind him, surrounded by flashing red and blue lights. Marcus looked towards the gathering of neighbors. Some appeared concerned. Others seemed pleased that their suspicions had been confirmed. The humiliation settled over him like a physical burden. Beneath it, however, a cold and calculated fury began to grow. Marcus looked directly at Officer Harlow. The patrolman was smiling proudly, satisfied with the arrest. "Officer," Marcus said. His voice dropped lower, carrying such chilling authority that Pike visibly flinched. "I am going to give you one opportunity. Examine the identification again, run my name through your dispatch system, remove these handcuffs, apologize, and leave my property. If you refuse, I promise that your career in law enforcement will end." Harlow laughed loudly. The abrasive sound echoed along the street. "Oh, I'm terrified. What are you going to do, sue me? Get in line. I've dealt with hundreds of loudmouths like you. You're going to a holding cell." "I am not a loudmouth," Marcus replied quietly, staring into Harlow's eyes. "I am a man who understands exactly how the system operates. And you, officer, have made a catastrophic mistake." "Put him in the cruiser," Harlow told Pike, dismissing the warning entirely. Pike took Marcus by the arm and guided him toward the patrol car. Before placing him inside, the young officer pressed the button on his shoulder radio. "Dispatch, Unit 47, we have one person in custody at 4420 Oakwood Drive. The suspect is secured, requesting transportation." "Copy, Unit 47, the dispatcher responded. "Can you provide the suspect's name?" Harlow lifted his own radio. "The suspect claims his name is Marcus Ellington. It's probably an alias. We're bringing him in for processing." Silence followed. It continued long enough for Harlow to glance impatiently at the radio. Then the dispatcher returned, her voice noticeably tense. "Unit 47, repeat the suspect's name." "Marcus Ellington," Harlow said, rolling his eyes. "Ellington. What is the delay? Just enter it." Another silence followed. "Unit 47, remain at your location. Do not transport the suspect. The chief is coming onto the channel." Harlow frowned and exchanged a confused look with Pike. "The chief?" Pike whispered. "Why would the chief care about a burglary arrest?" Elsewhere, Police Chief Raymond Callahan sat inside the dim corner booth of a diner, nursing black coffee and a severe headache. Callahan had led the Crestwood Hills Police Department for years. Recently, his job had become increasingly difficult. State officials had launched broad investigations into civil rights abuses, excessive force, and municipal corruption. Crestwood Hills had become a major target. The governor had appointed a new and widely feared special prosecutor with extensive state and federal authority to investigate local police agencies and prosecute systematic misconduct. Callahan had been living in a constant state of fear. He knew his department was not clean. He also knew officers such as Trent Harlow were serious liabilities. The chief had been specifically warned that the new special prosecutor was relocating to Crestwood Hills to conduct an extensive investigation. The warning from the state had been unmistakable. One serious incident could result in the department being placed under outside control, the command staff being removed, and pensions being lost. The radio attached to Callahan's belt came alive. Normally, he ignored routine dispatch traffic during his break and allowed the watch commander to manage it. But the address caught his attention. One in custody at 4420 Oakwood Drive. Callahan frowned and lowered his coffee. He recognized that address. The mayor had recently informed him that the city had quietly arranged high-level residential security for an important official moving into that property. The home was being leased through the state attorney general's office. Callahan reached for his radio and listened carefully. The suspect claims his name is Marcus Ellington. Every trace of color disappeared from Callahan's face. His stomach seemed to collapse. Cold fear seized his chest so violently that he thought he might lose consciousness. Marcus Ellington, the newly appointed special prosecutor, the man who controlled the future of the entire police department, the man who had already dismantled corrupt law enforcement agencies in several major cities. And one of Callahan's officers had placed him in handcuffs. The chief did not immediately respond over the radio. He rushed from the booth, dropped money onto the table, and ran out of the diner. He threw himself into his unmarked SUV, started the engine, and activated the emergency lights and siren. The tires smoked as the vehicle raced from the parking lot. With one trembling hand on the steering wheel, Callahan pressed the radio button. "Unit 47, this is Chief Callahan," he said, his voice breaking with panic. "Do not move. Do not place that man inside your vehicle. Do not say anything else to him. If either of you is touching him, remove your hands immediately. I am coming to the scene. Hold your position." Back on Oakwood Drive, Harlow stared at the radio. "The chief," Pike whispered, his face becoming pale. "Why is he shouting?" "I don't know," Harlow replied. His arrogant confidence had begun to disappear. He looked from the radio toward Marcus, who remained beside the cruiser with his hands restrained behind his back. Marcus gave Harlow a cold smile without humor. "I believe your opportunity has expired, officer." "Be quiet," Harlow snapped. The anger in his voice no longer carried the same confidence. Doubt was spreading through him. He snatched the wallet from Pike and studied the driver's license more carefully. The photograph matched. The address matched. Behind the license, Harlow discovered a polished silver credential card. State of Illinois, Marcus A. Ellington, Special Prosecutor, Office of the Attorney General. Harlow felt his knees weaken. The color disappeared from his face. He raised his eyes toward Marcus, his mouth hanging open. I told you who I was, Marcus replied softly. The police lights reflected in his steady eyes. And I told you what would happen. The street became agonizingly quiet, except for the idling cruiser. The neighbors remained outside, confused by the sudden pause. Harlow and Pike stood motionless, terrified to move or speak. Harlow's hand hovered near the keys to the handcuffs, but the chief's instructions had been absolute. Do not move. Do not touch him. A siren eventually pierced the silence. It grew louder and more desperate as a black Ford Explorer with hidden emergency lights raced around the corner. The vehicle stopped at a harsh angle behind the patrol car, partly on the lawn. The driver's door opened before the SUV had completely settled. Chief Callahan stumbled out. He was breathing heavily, his tie was crooked, and his face had turned a frightening shade of red. He ran up the driveway without acknowledging either officer. Callahan stopped directly in front of Marcus. He looked at the handcuffs cutting into Marcus's wrists. He saw the dirt on the cashmere sweater. He saw the red mark forming on Marcus's cheek where Harlow had forced him against the Mercedes. Callahan closed his eyes and released a shaking breath. He knew with complete certainty that his career, and perhaps the entire department, had just been destroyed. "Mr. Ellington," the chief whispered. His voice trembled with terror and profound apology. "Sir, I am deeply sorry." The silence along Oakwood Drive was complete except for the steady engine of the cruiser and Harlow's shallow breathing. Callahan stared at the heavy restraints around the special prosecutor's wrists. The seriousness of the situation overwhelmed him. He had survived political disasters throughout his career, but this could not be explained away. A powerful state prosecutor stood injured in his own driveway after being falsely arrested by Crestwood Hills officers. Callahan slowly turned toward Harlow. The expression on the chief's face carried lethal intensity. It was the look of a man watching his reputation, pension, and life's work burn to ashes. "The keys," Callahan demanded in a low and terrifying voice. "Give them to me." Harlow's hand shook so violently that he struggled to open the pouch on his belt. The small key slipped from his fingers and struck the concrete. The sound was startlingly loud in the silent neighborhood. Harlow hurried to retrieve it, perspiration forming across his forehead despite the cool evening air. "Chief, we received a call," he stammered. "Dispatch reported a burglary. He was working on the door." "Close your mouth," Callahan said. He took the key from Harlow and shoved the officer aside. Then he stepped carefully behind Marcus. "Mr. Ellington, I am removing the restraints." The chief's hands trembled as he inserted the key. The handcuffs opened. Marcus slowly brought his arms forward and winced as circulation returned to his hands. Deep red marks surrounded both wrists. He rubbed them carefully before turning toward the officers. "Chief Callahan," Marcus said. He did not raise his voice. His tone was completely controlled, without theatrical anger. Yet every word cut through the night. "I assume you know who I am." "Yes, sir," Callahan replied. "I do. I cannot express how sorry I am for this catastrophic misunderstanding." "It was not a misunderstanding," Marcus corrected. He adjusted the sleeves of his cashmere sweater. "A misunderstanding is an incorrect address or a respectful inquiry. What occurred here was an aggressive and obvious violation of my Fourth Amendment rights. It was an investigative detention conducted without reasonable, articulable suspicion, immediately followed by excessive force, false imprisonment, and battery." Marcus stepped forward. Harlow instinctively moved backward and partially hid behind the chief. "I identified myself immediately," Marcus continued, staring directly at the officer. "I provided my address and offered identification. In response, I was assaulted, forced against my own vehicle, and mocked." Before Callahan could respond, a sharp and self-righteous voice interrupted them. "It's about time someone did something about crime in this neighborhood." Miriam Gable marched up the driveway wearing a floral robe and carrying her phone against her chest like a symbol of accomplishment. She had seen the chief arrive and assumed he had come to congratulate the officers. "I was the person who called," she announced proudly. She glared toward Marcus and looked expectantly at the police. "I saw him working on the lock. I knew he didn't belong here. You did a wonderful job, officers. We have to protect the neighborhood." Chief Callahan stared at her in disbelief. He opened his mouth, prepared to order her back into her house before she caused even more damage. Marcus raised one hand and stopped him. He turned toward Miriam and gave her a polite but frighteningly calm smile. Good evening, ma'am. My name is Marcus Ellington. I purchased this property recently and moved into it. Miriam's triumphant expression disappeared. She blinked and looked from Marcus to the patrol car, then toward the chief, who appeared physically ill. That isn't possible, she said. The Henderson family moved away. I never saw any moving vehicles. My relocation was conducted privately because of the sensitive nature of my employment with the state of Illinois, Marcus explained. He moved slightly closer. The authority in his voice caused Miriam to step backward. You initiated the emergency call? I thought you were a burglar, she replied weakly. Because I was repairing a malfunctioning lock on my own front door? Marcus asked. His tone remained calm, but every question carried legal danger. Or because I am a black man standing in Crestwood Hills? That had nothing to do with it, Miriam gasped, touching the pearls around her neck. It had everything to do with it, Marcus said quietly. You ignored the possibility of a routine explanation and immediately reported a crime in progress. Your reckless assumption directly contributed to a serious civil rights violation. Marcus turned toward Chief Callahan and pointed toward Miriam. Chief, ensure that this woman's information is formally recorded. I will subpoena the emergency call recording. She is now a material witness in a civil rights investigation, and I intend to explore civil litigation against her for initiating a false report that resulted in physical injury. Miriam gasped. Civil litigation? You cannot sue me. I was protecting the neighborhood. You will hear from my attorneys, Marcus replied. I recommend that you obtain legal representation. He turned away from her. Miriam remained frozen for a moment before hurrying back toward her house in terror. Marcus looked at Harlow and Pike. Pike appeared close to tears. Harlow looked like a prisoner, waiting for the floor beneath him to open. Officers, leave my property. Neither officer hesitated. Harlow grabbed Pike's sleeve, and both men hurried toward the patrol car. Not you, Chief, Marcus said as Callahan began to follow them. The chief stopped. You and I are going inside, Marcus continued, gesturing toward the open front door, where the repaired smart lock glowed green. We have a great deal to discuss. The interior of Marcus's home was completely different from the chaos that had consumed the driveway. It was elegant and minimalist, with dark hardwood floors, high ceilings, abstract artwork, and spotless white walls. The air carried the faint smell of cedar and fresh paint. Chief Callahan stood awkwardly in the foyer, looking uncomfortable in his wrinkled uniform. Marcus walked to a small wet bar and poured himself sparkling water. He drank slowly. He did not offer anything to the chief. He did not ask Callahan to sit. Mr. Ellington, the chief began, desperate to control the conversation before the silence overwhelmed him. I personally guarantee that Officer Harlow will be suspended without pay immediately. His badge will be on my desk. He will be terminated. Officer Pike will face serious discipline and retraining. I will personally— Stop speaking, Chief, Marcus interrupted. His voice was conversational but absolute. Callahan immediately became silent. Marcus walked toward a glass dining table and rested both hands against it. The light from the chandelier cast sharp shadows across his face and highlighted the bruise forming on his cheek. Do you believe I care only about Trent Harlow? Marcus asked. Do you think removing one arrogant patrol officer will solve this? Callahan swallowed. Sir, it was an isolated example of poor judgment. Do not insult my intelligence, Marcus snapped. His voice struck through the room. I have spent months reviewing data from the Crestwood Hills Police Department. The Attorney General sent me here because complaints involving your department's use of force have increased dramatically. Your traffic stop statistics show indefensible racial disparities, and your Internal Affairs Division dismisses nearly every civilian complaint without meaningful disciplinary action. Marcus stepped closer. Harlow is not an exception, Raymond. He represents the culture, a culture you created and protected. He felt completely safe assaulting a compliant, passive man who had already offered identification. Why? Because he believed you would protect him. Because this was not the first time he had behaved this way. Callahan's silence confirmed everything. I moved into this community quietly, Marcus continued, pacing around the table. I wanted to observe your department before beginning my formal investigation. I wanted to see how this city operated when its leaders believed no one important was watching. I received my answer almost immediately. Mr. Ellington, please, Callahan said, perspiration forming on his hands. If this becomes public, if the Attorney General uses the incident to impose outside control, the city will be devastated. The mayor will dismantle the department. Morale will collapse. Morale? Marcus laughed bitterly. You are worried about the morale of officers who force innocent homeowners against vehicles? Let me explain what will happen. Marcus removed his cell phone, touched the screen, and placed it face up on the table. That is a draft of the preliminary injunction I was preparing to file. But your department gave me an extraordinary gift tonight. A painful, humiliating gift. You provided first-hand and undeniable evidence of systematic constitutional violations. Callahan stared at the device as though it were an explosive. But there is something else, Marcus said, leaning forward. I do not merely want a consent decree. Consent decrees take years and become trapped in bureaucracy. I want the immediate removal of your corrupt command structure, and I possess enough leverage to achieve it. Marcus stared directly into the chief's eyes. I know about the Miller-Hastings audit. Callahan recoiled. All color disappeared from his face. The Miller-Hastings audit was a confidential internal investigation into the disappearance of $40,000 from the department's evidence facility. The money was connected to a local narcotics organization. The audit implicated senior command officers who were close friends of Chief Callahan. The chief had buried the report, claiming that its findings were inconclusive. How could you know about that? Callahan whispered. I am the special prosecutor, Marcus replied coldly. I do not enter through the front door. I come through the foundation. I intended to use that report to force your resignation later. After what your officers did tonight, the schedule has changed. Marcus lifted his glass and drank again, leaving Callahan to absorb the approaching destruction. Here is your ultimatum, Raymond. It is not negotiable. He raised one finger. First, Harlow will be terminated, not suspended pending an investigation. I will personally pursue criminal battery charges against him. You will not protect him. Callahan nodded weakly. Marcus raised another finger. Second, you will immediately implement the civilian oversight board the mayor has proposed. The board will receive full subpoena authority over internal affairs. The union will strike, Callahan said. Let them, Marcus replied. Because if they do, the third condition becomes effective. I will hold a press conference on my front lawn. I will release the body camera footage of the assault. I will release the emergency call recording. I will publish the evidence of racially discriminatory traffic stops. And I will release the unedited Miller-Hastings audit showing that you concealed felony theft committed by your own command officers. Callahan seized the edge of the table to remain upright. He was trapped. If he resisted, he could face criminal charges and public destruction. If he obeyed, he would have to betray his union and closest associates, dismantling the power structure he had spent years building. You are destroying my department, Callahan said hollowly. I am performing an amputation necessary to save the patient, Marcus corrected. You created a department that operates through arrogance and impunity. Tonight, that impunity collided with someone who possessed the ability to fight back. Most citizens Harlow forces against a vehicle do not carry credentials more powerful than his badge. I do. Marcus walked to the front door and opened it. Cold air entered the foyer. The patrol car remained outside, though its emergency lights had been switched off. Harlow and Pike were waiting beside it. You have until tomorrow morning to complete the termination papers and sign the oversight agreement, Marcus said. If my telephone does not ring confirming compliance, I will contact the media and the FBI. Callahan slowly approached the exit. He appeared to have aged years during the conversation. He stopped at the doorway and looked back at Marcus. I once believed I was a good police officer, the chief whispered, genuine despair in his voice. Somewhere along the way, I only wanted to protect my people. Your responsibility was to protect the public, Marcus replied without sympathy. You forgot the difference. Good night, Chief. Marcus closed the heavy door. The smart lock clicked and displayed a secure green light. Outside, Callahan walked slowly down the driveway. Harlow hurried toward him, desperate for reassurance. Chief, what did he say? Are we going to be all right? Callahan stopped and looked at the patrolman who had destroyed his world. Anger rose inside him, but it was directed as much toward himself as toward Harlow. Give me your badge, Trent, he said in a lifeless voice. And your weapon. You are finished. Inside the precinct, the low hum of the clock filled the nearly empty squad room. The building smelled of stale coffee, floor wax, and overheated electrical equipment. 4 men gathered around the heavy oak desk inside Chief Callahan's glass office. Trent Harlow still wore his uniform, but his duty belt had been removed. He paced like a trapped animal. Beside him stood Gordon Sullivan, the red-faced and heavy-set president of the local police association. Captain Victor Reynolds leaned against a filing cabinet with his arms folded. Reynolds was one of the senior officers implicated in the concealed Miller-Hastings evidence scandal. Callahan had just explained the ultimatum Marcus had delivered. He watched panic and anger spread across the other men. "You cannot be serious, Raymond," Sullivan said, slamming one hand against the desk. "You are going to allow some government attorney to enter our city, dictate personnel decisions, and force a civilian board on us because of a bruised wrist and injured pride." "Absolutely not. The union will walk out." "This is not about a bruised wrist," Callahan replied. His eyes were red from exhaustion. "It is false arrest, battery, and an enormous civil rights violation committed against the special prosecutor assigned to investigate this department. He has the recordings." "So what?" Harlow said. He stopped pacing and glared at the chief. "He became aggressive. He resisted. I used approved control methods. A resident reported a burglary. We acted in good faith. Any local judge will dismiss his complaint." "He does not need a local judge," Callahan said, pressing both hands against his temples. "He has direct access to federal investigators. And he is not threatening only you. He knows about the Miller-Hastings audit." Captain Reynolds immediately straightened. The color vanished from his face. "He knows about the missing money?" "He knows everything," Callahan replied. "He will release the unedited report if I do not terminate Harlow and approve the oversight agreement. If that happens, you and the others implicated in the audit may face federal theft charges. And I may face federal prison for conspiracy and obstruction." The room became silent. Sullivan's confidence disappeared. He looked from Reynolds toward the chief and finally understood that the crisis went far beyond a union dispute. It was about survival. Harlow, however, refused to accept that he would be sacrificed. The same narcissism that made him dangerous on the street now transformed him into a cornered animal. "No," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "I will not become the sacrifice for your stolen money." "Trent, it is finished," Callahan said. "The union can arrange a quiet severance agreement, but you must resign." "To hell with the severance agreement," Harlow shouted. He stepped closer to the chief's desk. "You believe you can destroy me to save yourself? Let me explain what will happen. When you buried that audit, you and Captain Reynolds discussed altering the evidence records inside a patrol vehicle. You believe the dashboard audio system was disabled. It was not. I checked that vehicle into the motor pool. I removed the memory card and placed it in a safe deposit box." Callahan froze. The air left his lungs. Captain Reynolds stumbled into the filing cabinet. "You recorded us?" he asked, his eyes wide with terror. "I created insurance," Harlow replied. A sick smile appeared on his face. "Here is my ultimatum, Chief. You do not fire me. You tell Marcus Ellington to go to hell. If he releases the audit, I release the recording of you and Reynolds discussing a felony. If I fall, the entire command staff falls with me. Do we understand one another?" Harlow did not wait for a response. He stormed from the office and slammed the glass door hard enough to shake the frame. Sullivan released a quiet whistle. "It appears you are trapped, Raymond." Callahan collapsed into his chair. He had only a short period before Marcus destroyed the department, and now his own patrol officer was blackmailing him. The chief looked down at his hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. The network of corruption and protection he had spent years building was collapsing inward around him. Later that morning, Marcus sat inside the bright breakfast area of his new home wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. A cup of Earl Grey tea rested beside an organized stack of legal documents. His tablet displayed the local news. His cell phone vibrated with an alert connected to his name. Marcus opened the notification. It led to a breaking news article in the Crestwood Daily Tribune. Exclusive. Police source claims new state prosecutor used political power to avoid arrest and threatened local officers. Marcus read the story with a frighteningly calm expression. The article had clearly been provided to a friendly reporter by Trent Harlow. It presented an entirely false version of events. According to the story, officers had responded to a legitimate burglary report. Marcus had become violently uncooperative, verbally abused the police, and used his state authority to blackmail the chief into dropping charges and firing an innocent officer. Marcus placed the phone on the table and calmly drank his tea. He was not angry. He was deeply satisfied. Marcus already knew Harlow was a narcissist. He had reviewed the officer's disciplinary history. Narcissistic people rarely accepted defeat. They attempted to control the story. Marcus had expected Harlow to make a serious mistake. The officer had now provided the final piece of evidence needed to destroy the department's leadership. A black SUV soon entered the driveway. Marcus watched through the window as Chief Callahan approached the house. The chief looked like a man walking toward his own execution. His shoulders were lowered, and his face was gray. Marcus opened the door before Callahan could knock. "Mr. Ellington," the chief said hoarsely. He extended a manila folder with a trembling hand. "Harlow's signed termination documents are inside. The mayoral agreement establishing the Civilian Oversight Board with full subpoena authority is also signed by me and the union president. We met your conditions." Marcus looked at the folder but did not accept it. Instead, he raised the tablet and displayed the Tribune headline. Callahan narrowed his eyes and read the article. The remaining hope disappeared from his face. "No, I did not authorize this. Harlow acted alone." "The conditions were simple," Marcus said coldly. "Terminate the officer, sign the agreement, and allow the matter to be resolved privately." "But your officer attempted to damage my reputation through the media." "Please," Callahan said. Tears formed in his eyes. "I gave you what you requested. Harlow has an audio recording of a mistake I made years ago. He attempted to blackmail me. I approved his termination anyway. I sacrificed everything." "You did not sacrifice anything for me," Marcus replied sharply. "You obeyed because you had no remaining alternative. The agreement required complete cooperation and silence. Harlow violated that silence. The agreement is no longer valid." "What will you do?" Callahan whispered. "What I was sent here to do," Marcus answered. "I recommend that you return to the department and retain an excellent attorney." Marcus closed the door. By midday, the front lawn of 4420 Oakwood Drive had been transformed into a press area. News vehicles from major Chicago networks and suburban stations crowded the street. A cluster of microphones surrounded a podium positioned in the driveway. Residents watched from their porches while state police officers protected the area. Miriam Gable remained nearby, horrified and deeply embarrassed. Marcus stepped before the cameras in an immaculate suit. The press immediately became silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice commanding the attention of everyone present. "I recently moved into this neighborhood to begin my service as special prosecutor for the state attorney general. Last night, while repairing the lock on my own front door, I was racially profiled, falsely accused, and physically assaulted by officers of the Crestwood Hills Police Department." A murmur spread through the reporters. "However, this press conference is not about me," Marcus continued. "What occurred outside my home was merely a symptom of a disease that has infected the foundation of law enforcement in this city." Marcus gestured toward a state technician positioned beside a large monitor. The display came to life. Body camera footage showed Trent Harlow forcing Marcus against the Mercedes. At the same time, the emergency call recording played. Miriam Gable's frightened and unfounded accusations echoed across the front lawn. Reporters gasped. The evidence was direct and impossible to deny. Officer Trent Harlow attempted to provide a false story to the media, claiming that I was the aggressor, Marcus said while holding up a stack of documents. "But Officer Harlow is not the most serious problem facing Crestwood Hills. The corruption does not end with patrol officers. It reaches the chief's office." Marcus raised the bound copy of the Miller-Hastings audit. "This is an internal report that Chief Raymond Callahan concealed. It documents the systematic theft of more than $40,000 from a narcotics evidence facility by Captain Victor Reynolds and other members of the command staff. Chief Callahan buried evidence of that felony to protect his associates." The press erupted into shouted questions. Marcus raised his voice over the confusion. "Effective immediately, I am pursuing federal civil rights charges and criminal battery charges against Officer Trent Harlow. I am transferring the complete Miller-Hastings report to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I am filing an emergency petition with the state's highest court to place the Crestwood Hills Police Department under immediate outside control." As Marcus spoke, cameras captured several black FBI vehicles traveling toward the police station. "No one is above the law," he concluded, looking directly into the main broadcast camera, "especially those who wear a badge and claim the authority to enforce it." Federal agents soon escorted Chief Callahan and Captain Reynolds from the precinct in handcuffs. Trent Harlow was arrested at his home. He cried as steel restraints closed around his wrists, creating a sharp and ironic echo of the pain he had inflicted on Marcus. By evening, Crestwood Hills had become quiet again. But the silence was different. Miriam Gable's curtains remained tightly closed, her reign of suspicion and fear permanently shattered. The residents who had watched the abuse without intervening now understood that accountability had moved into the house across the street. Marcus sat on his porch and watched twilight settle across the neighborhood. The smart lock displayed a peaceful green light. The struggle for the city had only begun. But the first strike had been precise and devastating. Marcus lifted his tea and finally enjoyed the silence. Abuse of authority flourishes in darkness, depending on fear and silence, to protect people who use a badge as a shield for their own arrogance. But true authority does not come from a uniform or a pair of handcuffs. It comes from the relentless and uncompromising pursuit of justice. Marcus Ellington transformed the most humiliating moment of his life into a masterful demonstration of how to dismantle corruption from within. If this story of justice, accountability, and triumph kept your heart racing, press the like button and share the video with your friends. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, true-to-life dramas in which justice always has the final word.